In online communities centered around K-pop idols such as Twitter, Weibo, Instagram, and dedicated fan forums, a familiar scene frequently appears when an idol's music, stage performance, career decision, or public image receives criticism. Even when that criticism is relatively mild or cautiously phrased, it often triggers rapid, intense, and highly coordinated reactions from fans. These reactions commonly include emotionally charged rebuttals, the labeling of critics as haters or outsiders, and collective efforts to exclude dissenting voices. In some cases, conflicts escalate across platforms, turning disagreement into personal attacks. While critical debates certainly exist in other areas of popular culture, such as independent music or film fandoms, the intensity, organizational scale, and speed of defensive responses appear particularly pronounced in K-pop fan culture. This phenomenon is not incidental, it is deeply embedded in a fandom ecosystem that relies heavily on digital platforms for information circulation, community cohesion, and identity performance. Platform design, algorithmic recommendation systems, and competitive attention dynamics form the structural background of these interactions. In public discourse, these defensive reactions are often explained in simple psychological terms. Fans are described as irrational, overly emotional, or blindly devoted. While such explanations may appear intuitive, they are analytically limited. First, they fail to explain why other highly passionate groups such as sports fans, literary enthusiasts, or classical music audiences do not consistently react to criticism in the same way or with the same intensity. Second, they overlook the specific media environment in which K-pop fandom operates. When fan reactions are reduced to individual emotion, no weakness, the role of digital platforms as structural and mediating forces disappears from view. If we want to understand why criticism is so frequently experienced as attack, we need to ask not only who is reacting, but also where and under what conditions these reactions take place. This analysis does not aim to judge whether fans' reactions are reasonable or excessive. Instead, it asks a different set of questions. How do digital platforms shape the way criticism circulates, is interpreted, and becomes emotionally charged within K-pop fandom? How is criticism redefined through platform-specific discourse such as protecting idols, anti-hate purification, data competition, and how do these redefinitions connect criticism to fans' individual and collective identities, thereby triggering defensive emotional practices? The core concern here is mediation, rather than treating criticism as a stable message with a fixed meaning. The study examines how its meaning is actively produced through platform environments, emotional investment, and participatory norms. To begin answering these questions, we must rethink emotion itself. Emotion is not simply an internal psychological state. It is a social phenomenon that can be expressed, recognized, and shared through language, symbols, and practices. In fan responses to criticism, emotional language is highly visible. Comments frequently express anger, grievance, humiliation, and a sense of being offended. Insults, imperative tones, and emotionally loaded phrases are common. These expressions indicates that fans are not merely disagreeing with an opinion, they are reacting to an experience that feels emotionally consequential. However, emotion alone does not explain why criticism is experienced as personally threatening. To understand that, we must turn to identity. Emotional identification helps explain why criticism so often feels personal. Emotional identification refers to the process through which individuals incorporate external objects such as people, cultural texts, or groups into their self-understanding through emotional investment. For many fans, idols are not simply objects of preference, they are meaningful figures through which fans confirm who they are, what they value, and where they belong. In this sense, liking an idol is not merely an opinion, it is a component of identity. As a result, criticism of an idol is not experienced as distant evaluation, it is felt as a denial of one's judgment, taste, emotional commitment, or moral stance. What appears as emotional overreaction is, from this perspective, a response to perceived intrusion into the self. If emotional identification already exists, why does it become so intense and widespread in contemporary K-pop fandom? The answer lies in digital platforms. Platforms introduce visibility, continuity, and comparison. Emotional expression is public and persistent. Support is quantified through likes, streams, votes, and rankings. Positions are repeatedly displayed and rarely withdrawn. Under these conditions, emotional attachment becomes not only personal but publicly accountable. Evaluation is no longer experienced as private disagreement. It becomes a challenge to a publicly performed identity. The platform environment transforms emotional identification into a high-stake experience. This dynamic can be understood through the concept of platform affordances. Platform affordances refer to how technological environments encourage certain behaviors while constraining others. Features such as trending lists, engagement metrics, and algorithmic recommendation systems reward visibility, emotional intensity, and confrontation. In entertainment platforms, popularity is translated into numbers, streams, rankings, and chart positions. Emotional support becomes measurable output. As a result, criticism is often reframed as denial of quantifiable success. Statements such as "the data proves it" illustrate how aesthetic disagreement is transformed into perceived factual invalidation. Criticism becomes a threat to both symbolic and numerical legitimacy. Participatory culture further intensifies this process. Fans are not passive consumers. They are expected to participate actively by streaming, voting, commenting, and defending. Over time, participation generates norms and obligations. Responding to criticism becomes a responsibility, since silence may be interpreted as indifference. Failure to defend may be framed as disloyalty. Defensive practices such as coordinated command control, reporting campaigns, and mass rebuttals are not framed as emotional access, they are reframed as acts of love, justice, and responsibility. Emotional defense thus becomes a collective moral practice rather than an individual reaction. To examine these dynamics, the study adopts qualitative discourse analysis rather than measuring frequency or sentiment statistically. It focuses on how language constructs meaning within specific contexts. The materials analyzed consist of fan comments posted in response to external criticism on social media platforms. These comments are treated not as representative data but as instance of cultural practice through repeated close reading. The analysis identifies recurring emotional expressions and discursive patterns. The aim is not to evaluate whether criticism is fair, but to understand how it is experienced as an emotional event. The analysis shows that criticism is not uniformly interpreted as offense. Instead, it exists along a context-dependent spectrum. On discussion-oriented platforms, calm and technically informed criticism may be accepted as legitimate debate. On fast-paced platforms, short and emotionally framed comments are more likely to be categorized as malicious attacks. Who speaks, where they speak, and how the platform amplifies the message all shape how criticism is understood. Meaning is not fixed, it is actively constructed. Defensive reactions intensify when criticism strengthens identity. This occurs in three ways: questioning fans' judgment, devaluing emotional investment, and damaging collective honor. In a competitive, data-driven environment, criticism of idols' achievement is often experienced as denials of fans' collective labor. Defending idols thus becomes a way to defend self-worth and group value. Platform mechanisms further amplify these dynamics. Algorithms promote controversy. Quantified metrics turn criticism into perceived threats. Echo chambers reinforce unified internal narratives. Platforms do not simply host conflict, they organize, accelerate, and intensify it. Fan defensiveness is not simply emotional access, it is a structural experience produced by emotional and identification, platform affordances, and participatory norms. Understanding this helps us move beyond moral judgments and towards a deeper understanding of how identity, emotion, and evaluation interact in platformized culture. In a world where identity is increasingly performed under constant visibility, criticism becomes harder to bear for everyone, not only fans. Understanding fan reactions help us understand how people more broadly learn to live with judgment, uncertainty, and the self in a consistently observed world.